Let me assure you that the story I'm about to tell you is 100% real, unfiltered, and just as terrifying to me now as it was back then. I don't care if you don't believe in evil, things unseen, malicious spirits, etc. I never really bought into the whole ghost or possession thing either. Neither did my cousins, but we'll get back to that part later. Let me give you a little history. I'm a female in my early to mid-20s, with a devout, religious family and a lifetime of religious schooling saddled on my back. If there was any sort of discussion about spirits, it was the Holy One. We veered away from any sort of talks regarding the occult or anything even semi-sacrilegious. This always seemed odd to me, as you can't truly have them without evil. Add the factor of children under strict religious teachings and wag the finger at them for inquiring, and you've got one curious cat on your hands. Me? I wasn't too curious. I feared even opening that door, after all. I was only 8 and I'd seen damn nearly every horror, Ouija, and ghost movie you could think of. My cousin, who was 11 at the time, was a lot less cautious. This is how her story turned into mine. Every Christmas, for as long as I can remember, we would visit my relatives in New York. I had 2 cousins I was extremely close to, we'll call them Jess and Sarah, who I would spend all my time with. While all the relatives were next door at my grandma's, we would be over at their house, playing with their dogs, making videos on their early 2000s video cam, and watching movies. Jess was the same age as me, and Sarah was 3.5 years older. Jess had always been a scaredy cat and crybaby who was afraid of everything and extremely emotionally fragile. Sarah, however, had a dark streak to her even when she was young. She was witty, dry, and hell-bent on scaring Jess and I with ghost stories when we were as young as 4. At 11, she became heavily invested in all things Harry Potter. She even bought herself a wand and regularly participated in writing Harry Potter fanfics. At one point, she bypassed the run-of-the-mill Harry Potter accessories and began to buy books on witchcraft. She even hung a spells poster on her wall. When Sarah turned 12, which was when things began to get weird, she would constantly have nightmares where she would wake up and see dark figures at the end of her bed. The room would get cold. The darkness of the figures were a stark contrast to the blackness of her room. There was a presence there, and she could feel it. They didn't have a specific shape or form, they just leered over her form. The only way I can truly describe them is similar to the shadows at the end of the 80s movie Ghost, where Patrick Swayze's frenemy gets dragged to Lord knows where by these shapeless shadows. For a while, that was it. 12-year-old Sarah would wake up, see the figures standing at the foot of her bed, unmoving, and bury her head under the blankets until morning. It became an issue, however, when roughly a month after seeing them for the first time, they began to move towards her. Sarah described the room as getting colder and colder the closer they got. As always, she would tuck her head under the covers, close her eyes tight and wait for morning to come. After all, these figures only watched her. Being a child of an emotionally fragile sister and 2 irresponsible parents, she wasn't sure it would have helped if she'd called out for help anyways. The first time her parents were alerted to her plight was not a result of a call of help. It was a direct result from her unprecedented screams of terror. The figures had not only approached her, but one had actually reached its poorly formed arm out and touched her shoulder before she could escape under the blankets. The chill that ran through her body, she described to me later, was the feeling of death. Despair. Not only what she considered to feel like the grave, but what she thought an eternally damned soul may feel right at the moment of departure. Like she was about to be dragged into the darkness, swallowed whole, never to return. For the next 3 years, she slept with the lights on in her room every night. Let me also add that I had no idea any of this was happening when I was a child. Sarah wasn't up to her tricks and telling ghost stories. I didn't find out about these events until I was 15. Although Sarah had decided to keep the lights on at night, something dark has taken a hold of her, both literally and metaphorically. She painted the walls to her room black and began to dress in only black. Her parents thought it was an anger phase, but when word got out that she was actually attempting to practice witchcraft and satanic rituals, unbeknownst to me or Jess at the time, things became serious. Fast forward to one of my trips out to New York. Jess and I were only 9 years old, but Sarah was 12 and tech-savvy. We made a homemade music video with her video camera to Complicated by Avril Lavigne, the hottest new song at the time. After dressing up and playing around, we built a fort out of sheets and pillows and crammed into it to watch our video. Jess had brought her Barbie with her, and Sarah, having been annoyed by her sister's constant camera hogging in our music video, grabbed it. This particularly upset Jess as it was her only brunette Barbie. The rest were all blonde and she was always pissed off because she clearly had brown hair, so her parents clearly missed the mark a few times. "Give it back!" Jess cried, to which Sarah replied with one of her typical, inappropriate responses, "Why? Because your Barbie's a hoe? Ooh, look, she's a stripper." Sarah promptly proceeded to strip the Barbie down to nothing and contort it into an odd shape, the type of shape you usually don't see a Barbie in. Jess, being a whiner, grabbed her Barbie back and chucked it across the room, where it landed on Sarah's pillow, naked and misshapen. While they bickered, I convinced them that we should go back into the fort and watch the video. However, the two began to scuffle, with me in the middle of their slapping match, and the pillow blanket fort crumbled around us, covering us in the sheet and shielding us from the rest of the room. When we emerged, I was the first one to realize that something was wrong. Sitting up, dead in front of my face in a chair, was the brunette Barbie. She was fully clothed, sitting neat and ladylike, except for the eerie tilt of her head and the smile that seemed to cause a shudder to run through me. I slowly turned my head to look at the bed, only to find an indent where the doll had been on an empty pillow. My blood ran cold. Sarah, being a smart cookie, followed my eyes to the bed, only to snap her head around and look at the Barbie. There was no one else in the room. The door was shut. The air was cold. The walls were painted black. Jess carried on and Sarah slapped a hand over her mouth to silence her as we all came to the realization that Jess only had one brunette Barbie. The Barbie that had been wearing a yellow dress, which had been stripped, was now wearing the same yellow dress and sitting upright. Another quick turn of our heads allowed us to arrive at the horror that the Barbie is now gone. You heard me. The same damn doll that I'd been face to face with not a minute earlier has vanished from the chair in front of us. Sarah, stop messing around. I know you did this. I attempted to laugh it off. That attempt failed when tears streamed down Sarah's face. She never cried on cue. She barely ever cried at all. I'm not making this up. I swear. We were locked in a room with a Barbie that moved on its own. A room where witchcraft and amateur satanic rituals, unbeknownst to young Jess and I until later in our lives, had been practiced. A room where shadowy figures had haunted Sarah and scared her so deeply, she hadn't slept with the lights off in months. From the corner of our eyes, we all witnessed another toy in the room move on its own, a stuffed meerkat, if I remember correctly. Its head moved towards us slowly. The three of us whimpered and shuddered, only for the entire mountain of toys in the room to come crashing down moments later and a sickening, inhuman, gurgling noise to envelope the entire room. We ran. Not only did I have to live out the fear of a horror movie in that moment, but I had to live out the moment in horror movies where parents won't believe their children. We entered our grandmother's house screaming and crying, with all 5 adults looking at us in shock. The Barbie. Crybaby Jess croaked, it moved on its own. It traveled across the room, no one else was, we. Never the brightest bulb in the bunch and a chronic liar, she was laughed off. Sarah chimed in, but she was notorious for telling ghost stories that always sent Jess and I running to our parents, so they shut her down too. I, however, had strict parents who would not stand for lies. I didn't lie often as a child and had a very open relationship with them. I told them everything. Suddenly, everyone in the room turned towards me, the one person who they actually might believe. I burst into a sob. "Dad! Please, it's true. She was there." Sarah threw the doll, it disappeared off the bed and was in front of us, and now it's gone again. All of those toys are evil. We were all under the sheets. There was no way Sarah could have tricked us. My parents still chastised me, but my sobs at least convinced my dad to come with us to check it out. We huddled behind him as we climbed the old wooden staircase slowly, each step of ours making a foreboding creak inside the unnaturally quiet house. When we finally reached the top, my dad peeked in. The mountain of toys still lay sprawled on the floor, but the Barbie was back. In the chair, dressed in yellow, in all of her macabre glory. We cried out. He shushed us. We begged him to throw each and every toy away, an unusual request from a group of 3 kids. Surprised, he obliged and gathered them into a basket, shuffling them over next door and claiming that we would feel differently in the morning. That night we slept in Jess' room, huddled together on her bed, whimpering under the covers. We knew what we'd seen. Finally, morning came, and we crept next door to our grandma's. All the toys were laid out on a set of 3 chairs, with the meerkat and the Barbie perched on top of the rest like generals readying their troops for warfare. We tiptoed in, only for the toys to inexplicably come crashing down again. Our screams filled the air and the adults came rushing down. We pleaded once again for my dad to get rid of the toys, and he finally grabbed 2 large garbage bags and stuffed the toys inside, grumbling about the ridiculousness of it all while he did so. We begged him to put the Barbie and the meerkat all the way at the bottom of the bag so the other toys would cover them. We're talking 30 toys here. He buried the 2 evil toys under the regular toys for us. They were moved outside, set on top of the dumpsters, waiting on the curb to be taken. When the trash truck rolled around the next day, my cousins and I watched cheerfully from the window as the accursed toys were transported to the dump. 2 days later, it was time to leave. Though we'd been mildly traumatized, my cousins and I had bonded over an event that none of us have forgotten to this day. This was not the end of the story, however, but only the beginning. As we loaded into the rental car, about to take off for the airport, my cousins stood on their stoop and waved goodbye. As my parents began to pull the car away, a flash of yellow caught my eye. The last thing my cousins must have seen was the look of terror as we pulled away and I saw the brunette Barbie, sitting on top of the trash can neatly with the same eerie tilt of the head and smile we'd seen a few nights before. Stay paranoid, my friends.